So welcome everyone. My name's Andrew King, for those that don't know me, and this is Atlantic Digital's Modernising Cyber Resilience webinar. I'd like to thank you all for your time. Hopefully we can make this a valuable part of your Tuesday and we can all get to our Echo holiday for those of us here in Brisbane. Starting us off, a little bit about me. I've worked a few places. I started off in the government, then I moved into a role in the resources sector, and now at Atlantic Digital, I get a much wider range of clients. I like to study, work and study fill up most of my time. But when I'm not studying, I love my gaming and my motorbikes. You can see a photo of me and my brother there at the Glasshouse Mountains having a great time. And for those of you who stick around to the end, as a little treat, I have a photo of me having not so good of a time at the Glasshouse Mountains. And the last thing about me is you'll find I have an analogy for everything. I love comparing two things. I don't know what it is. But a big one you're going to find through this webinar is my house analogy. Effectively, I like to treat your company like it's your home, and cybersecurity is all the things that keep your house safe. So the lock on your door, the gate out front, the security cameras, these are the things I'll bring up a lot when we're talking about the measures that keep you safe. Looking ahead at what we've got on today, we've got three broader categories. It's the attacks you're going to find in Australia in 2025, what you need to be doing about it, and finally, what Atlantic's doing about it and how we can help you. Looks like we've got enough people. So jumping straight into that first section, we've got attack statistics. Now, bear with me. I don't want to bore you with any statistics, but I think it's pretty important we start here. Statistics are honestly the most overlooked part of cybersecurity. Everyone knows what the attacks look like. You know, you get the dodgy emails, you hear about it on the news, you see the data leaks, but not many people can speak to the statistics about how often they're happening, what the most common types of attacks are, and who they're targeting. And that's what I really want to talk to first, so we have a good foundation, because it's one thing if I tell you about the attacks, but you kind of need to know how many attacks there are to weigh up how big the threat is. So the first statistic I have here, honestly, the scariest one for the day, every 10 minutes, a business in Australia falls victim to a cyber attack. And of those victims, 43% of them are in the small to medium business sector. Just sitting on that for a second, that's not being attacked, that is successfully compromised. So that's anything from your email getting accessed by someone who's not meant to, all the way through to a full-blown ransomware attack. Every 10 minutes, there's some form of successful compromise in an Australian business. To now weigh up how much that will actually have an impact, we've got the cost of breaches. So through the market, individuals are on the low end at $30,000. Small businesses are around 50,000, and medium and large businesses around that 63,000 mark. So if we're thinking about every 10 minutes, we're somewhere on this chart with a successful attack, that's about $5 million per day or $2 billion per year. The kind of scary part about that is that's not necessarily the amount going to the hacker. They're usually getting a small fraction of that. What these numbers really are is the damage to your business. So for each of these successful attacks, the damage comes from the things, if we take an example of an email compromise, in the event of an email compromise, you're losing more than just some financial data or your bank account details. The impact is business-wide. You have a cultural impact. Usually the first thing someone will do if they gain your email is they'll forward their dodgy email to everyone in your address book inside and outside the company. So not only do you have further compromises from your account being used, but there's a cultural impact of all of your vendors, all of your client relationships, everyone that's gotten that email, the next time you message them once you've had your account back, they're going to be thinking, is this another breach? You know, last time I saw this guy, it was a nightmare. Maybe I'm just better off not replying to it. So there's a lot of reputational loss there. The bigger and more obvious impact with an email breach is the first thing they're going to do is download all of your emails. So that's anything you've sent to your colleagues for the past forever long you've got stored, any intellectual property, any financial details, any business information at all. This is all ammunition that they can either use directly. So if there's financial data, they can compromise your financial systems, or they can use it as leverage against you. They can ransom it, they can sell it, they can do any number of things to scrape that damage out. And they're only looking for a small paycheck, but the fees and damages your business accrues during this are huge. Supporting that phishing argument, here's some direct stats on that. Quite frighteningly, for every 1,000 inboxes you have, an average of 600 of them get attacked every month. And you can even see towards the end of 2024 there, we get up to that 800 mark. That's just horrifying. Honestly, if we think about that's 2 out of every 3 staff at your company are being attacked per month. The bigger question that calls is, out of 3 people at your company, would you trust 2 of them not to fall victim to that attack every month? Would you trust them not to click on a link, not to reply back, not to interact with it at all? Me personally, I work with IT guys, so I have a bit more trust, and I'd still say no. The bigger picture as well is you shouldn't have to trust them. One thing I want to talk about later on in this webinar is a lot of systematic controls can be put in place to limit these kinds of attacks so that they don't end up with the end user. User awareness training is always something worth investing in, and it's something that's really important in a company, but usually that should be your last line of defense. There should be things between the dodgy attacks and the user that help protect them. I just see we have a comment there. I want to make sure that's addressed before we move on. Awesome. So moving away from phishing, I want to talk about some of the broader statistics. These are the top 3 threats for individual and businesses. Across the individual, it's exactly what you'd expect. The most valuable thing a single person has is their finances. So it's a lot of identity fraud, shopping fraud, and banking fraud. They're just trying to get your wallet off you. With businesses, we see they really are drilling down on that email compromise, with 33% being directly related to email compromise. And that little difference in there between email compromise and business email compromise is business email compromise is specifically where there's a direct financial loss. So the second they have your email, they've found your bank details, they've found an invoice, they've found something that they can immediately exploit to gain finances off you. Email compromise is that broader blanket. So we see 1/3 of all attacks are against your emails, but within that, another 1/3 has a direct financial loss. Finally, 13% of online banking fraud, they are still quite financially motivated, but we can see we're moving more towards the information era, where instead of coming directly for your business's finances, they're coming for things they can leverage, things they can exploit, things that are attacking the bigger picture of your business, not just your wallet. Finally, looking at stats for a different kind of attack, this is ransomware. So this threat's kind of on the more complex side of things. We can see there's twice the risk for a small to medium business compared to a enterprise. There's 6.2% of attacks against small to medium businesses are ransomware, whereas it's only 3.2 for enterprise. You'd think that this is wrong. You'd think that most of the time they'd go for enterprises that have higher funding, more things to lock, more things to leverage. In fact, it's the opposite. They've found enterprises are much more prepared for the threat of a ransomware, that half the time you could lock an entire enterprise's file system, anything they have, and within the afternoon they'd have it restored off some offsite backup and be laughing at you. Whereas a small to medium business, if you were to lock all of their files, the odds of them having backups at all are not very likely, we've found, and that's why they've become such a huge target. The unfortunate fact is, if you were to get ransomware as a small to medium business and not have things in place to restore your environment, most of the time you're looking at a full IT system rebuild. We're no longer looking at those $30,000, $40,000, and $60,000 losses. We're in the hundreds of thousands, because not only are you rebuilding all your IT systems, you're remaking all of the lost work that you've had either deleted or sold. You're not able to operate your business while we're doing the rebuild. There's just so many run-on effects of this kind of attack that it just blows out of proportion. And that's exactly what they're looking to exploit here, is small to medium businesses that think that there's not that big of a risk with ransomware. They don't invest in backups. They don't invest in a disaster recovery plan, and they leave themselves open to this kind of attack. So that's it for the statistics. You made it through. Now I want to talk about something a little more interesting, which is attack complexity and frequency. Just speak a bit to the attacks themselves, how they're evolving, and what we're looking at. First up, you had to know it was coming, AI. It's been the buzzword of the last 5 years, and it is everywhere. We all know AI, everyone loves ChatGPT, Copilot, things like that. It's embedded into everything. Unfortunately, as much as you love it, it is way better built for an attacker. The sad fact of the matter is AI for attacking is so much better than AI for business, and it's going to be the new big problem that we're facing across the board. I'll give you an example of that. So if we take our phishing attack we were just talking about, we know how bad it is. But if we talk about how something like AI could be used for it, I'll put on my hacker hat and pretend that I am trying to compromise you using AI. All I would need is something like your company's name, its domain, some piece of information that identifies you, and I can just hand it off to the system. What it will do now is crawl the internet for everything relating to that piece of information. So it will look up your company's website, your LinkedIn, your Facebook, your Instagram, whatever you might have, and then it will start indexing you. So it might identify key staff, the CEO, the CFO, people who have access to the money. Let's start with the CEO. Now it will look at what they're up to. What are they posting? Who are they reacting to? Who do they talk to in the comments? Who are their friends? Who are their associations? It can map out this huge picture of your company automatically, but it won't just stop there. Once it's happy with its indexing, it'll write up a little narrative and give me an email. So let's say it's impersonating a mate of the CEO. Hey mate, loved catching up with you last weekend at the barbecue that it's seen on Facebook. Here's that invoice for that job I did for you. I still haven't seen the payment, but let me know if you have any questions. There's a link below. If it gives you any trouble, just pop in your details. It should show up some files. Anyway, look forward to seeing you next week at the golf course. Automatically, it's based off this analysis it's done of the CEO, found someone they know, an event they've been to, event they're going to, written up a narrative, targeted them. And the bigger issue is it doesn't just stop there. For me to make an attack like that, I'd have to take a day, I'd say. It would take hours and hours of scrolling through Facebook, writing up a narrative. I'm not that creative, so I'd probably have to ask people for help on the narrative. And by the end of the day, I could send one email to one CEO. AI will do that whole thing in minutes, and it won't stop. It'll go to the next person, then the next, then the next. And once it's given me a whole campaign's worth of 100 emails, I can just send them at my leisure and wait for the credentials to roll in. Kind of encapsulating that, we have a new trend in 2025, which is known as phishing as a service. So phishing is the kind of title for that broad social engineering attack where you pretend to be someone with a certain bait, whereas it could be the bait of that email from their friend, and you try to gain something off them. Phishing as a service is a trend now where it's allowing people who are completely non-technical to become attackers by packaging these kits for less than $25. So now not only do you not have to do the work as an attacker, you don't even have to know about the work. At least in the past, there's always been automated tools, but you had to do some research. You had to have some capability to use them. Now, all you have to do to start off a phishing campaign like the one I just described is pay a little bit of money on some website and you get a whole dashboard. You put your information in and you can just watch it roll. You don't have to have any technical knowledge. On a different kind of attack now, I want to talk a bit about password sprays. So these are what I am referencing when I talk about why we need airtight policies in our companies. I refer to password sprays as a told you so attack because quite frankly, if you get done by one, you're going to have me or another IT representative saying, I told you so. These are one of the few attacks where they are significantly preventable just by having well-designed systems. They prey on misconfigurations or just unconfigured tenancies. The basic concept behind a password spray is, as the name implies, you get an account, you spray passwords at it until one sticks. They are designed to be low complexity. They don't take any input, so they don't use any of that social engineering tactic where you try and gain a bit of information about the target and help the attack. It is just a random, here's the most used password, here's a bunch of users, I'm just going to start spraying. And they're designed to just run barely outside of lockout conditions. So they don't lock your account out. They don't get picked up by a lot of signals. They just, maybe once an hour per user, here's a password. Next hour, here's another one. But the quantity they run these at is ridiculous. You will see these at most companies you look into. They're across most users. If someone's sent an email to a public source, if they've been involved in a data leak for whatever reason, if your email's out there, you're probably being sprayed with passwords once an hour, which sounds horrifying, but once again, if your systems are set up correctly, there's ways around these attacks. So it's worth just a little bit of investment into a tidy tenancy. Otherwise, you'll have me looking at you saying, I told you so. So moving on to the business's responsibility, This is actually a bit of a short section. This is a one slide because I can wrap it all up in 2 words. You got to inform yourself. Returning to my house analogy, would you live in a house with no idea of its security? Most of us would think it's a no-brainer to know what kind of security you have on your house. Obviously, everyone locks their front door when they come and go. Anyone I know that has security cameras loves showing them off. They love using it and knowing how safe they are. You lock your windows at night. It's just the basics. Unfortunately, when it comes to our business, it's not so obvious, and you never really get that kind of buy-in. First and best step towards securing your company is just knowing what you have and how to use it. And more importantly, why you have it. A big thing we find with staff is pushback on, I don't like the Authenticator app. I hate getting the pings when I'm logging in. I don't like being blocked when I go overseas. Why can't I just go to China and log in? And I don't like when it asks me to get an admin to run this app that I want. There's more of a big picture behind why we have these things, but users don't buy into that. And that's the biggest thing I want to change moving forwards. If people can start to understand why we're locking our doors, why we have the cameras up, what kind of threats are out there that these controls are preventing, the buy-in will be massive and we'll see a huge cultural shift for the better. And I see that as the biggest roadblocker between your company and better security. It's never typically the people such as yourself who are in this webinar who are buying in that are the problem. It's these users, these people that you see around you that need the extra effort to get over the line. And it paints a bigger picture. This is something I want to talk about a bit more later, but ultimately the biggest point I can make is cybersecurity is no longer a bolt-on solution. It's a joint venture. We can certainly help you, but we can't unilaterally secure you anymore. Attacks are just getting to the point where everyone needs to buy in and contribute to your business's safety, or you're not going to be ready. Like I said, everyone sees the dodgy emails. Everyone has things like password sprays hitting them. If you don't have complete buy-in from your company, there's going to be some little hole that they're going to exploit. And the nature of security moving forwards is there's so many attacks out there. There's so many resources making attacks easier, faster, more common. Those little holes aren't acceptable. They're going to be found. The best analogy I found from this, other than my house analogy that I love so much, is I was doing my standard 11 to go work on a mine site. It's a safety certificate you have to get. While you're doing it, you have to do a first aid course, pretty basic. And while I'm in this first aid course, there's some tradies over, don't want to be a part of it, aren't having a bar with the instructor, just messing around. Pretty classic. When that happened, the instructor actually reached out to me and said, mate, what are you doing about that? And when I got a bit defensive, he's like, well, just think of it this way. If you get into trouble, you're not going to be able to do first aid on yourself. You are relying on those guys to save your life in the event of an emergency. And you're just happy with them mucking around. Like, they don't care. You're watching. So if they're in trouble, you're going to go help them. But what happens when a beam falls on you or something goes wrong and you need their support? Are you going to trust them? And that's exactly how cybersecurity is right now. Like I said, everyone in this webinar are engaging. You guys are buying in, and I trust you. You're not the high-risk users. You might get done. It's not improbable. But at the end of the day, it's going to be the people around you who are leaving their screens unlocked, writing their passwords on sticky notes, clicking on links and emails just because they want to see what's on the other end. These are the high-risk users, and they're not likely to be the people that are in this webinar. So the best thing you can do is inform yourself and then start being that voice of change within your company. The best thing is if you see it, say it. It's all about helping them when they won't help themselves. But that's enough preaching at you. Like I said, I do respect that you're all the people who are buying in. So I want to talk about more of what Atlantic brings to the table, what we're doing. So our security approach, culturally, we're doing what's called security as a standard. A great thing that wraps this up is a quote from the CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella. If you're faced with a trade-off between security and another priority, your answer is clear. Do security. And that's the mentality. It's a cultural shift between just what we've been doing where everything works until there's an attack, where now we're trying to assume everything's dangerous until otherwise. So we're moving culturally, we're moving away from treating things reactively. It's that proactive, I'm going to lock all my systems, then allow the things that I need. I'm going to not have any applications, then allow the ones that my users need. You can see that we've got a little ISO 27001 badge. This is actually a standard that we've complied to, and it's in line with a lot of things like this. It's a series of controls that raise your business to that level where you start treating things as insecure so that you can only allowing the things you know and trust. And it's all about that cultural shift of what I call a whitelist mentality. Everything, you have to whitelist everything. You don't just start safe, you have to allow safe things into your environment. Expanding on that a little bit, a bit more on the practical side, we have what's called our 4-pillar approach. So it's important to understand these pillars so that we can effectively resource cybersecurity and make sure businesses have a well-rounded defense. If you can categorize each of your controls into one of these 4 steps, you'll be able to identify what's over-resourced. Does everything look good? Is there anything where there's a little gap? It's a great structure to fit into. So first off, we have limit. These are, as the name implies, limitations, reducing the attack surface. These are like locking down your logins to Australia, making your firewall and systems invisible to unauthorized users, and setting email rules to quarantine dodgy traffic. These are the things that make you invisible, and it's what I talk about when I say the password sprays that told you so. There are ways to limit a password spray so that your tenancy is either invisible or they get automatically rejected, or there's ways that it's impossible for your user to log in unless they're your actual user. And those are all limitations. They stop the attack from ever getting to your door. Prevent is where most of our cybersecurity tools live. If you've ever seen a cybersecurity solution, it's likely a preventative measure. These are the locks on your doors, the gate out the front, the barred windows. These are when someone's at your door, what stops them from getting into your house. And these are things practically like your antivirus, your intrusion detection and prevention, and your reactive tools. Prevent motion usually gets the most attention, and it is for good reason. If something makes its way to your front door, you want it stopped. You don't want to have no lock on the door. In fact, most people invest in that lock for that reason. And we don't always know what's coming. So it's good to point out that limit and prevent work hand in hand together. They don't compete for resources. They actually complement each other quite well. The same way that you will never be able to perfectly limit your environment because there's always going to be a smarter attack. There's always going to be a newer attack. You can't always prevent things. So it's important to invest in both so that there's less attacks for your preventative measures to process. And likewise, the things that do get past your limit, your preventative measures are strong enough to treat them. Now, recover kind of finishes off this trifecta where for the few things that would make it through your preventative measures, there has to be a way back. This is typically one of the most disagreed with things when you're talking to a client, because obviously it doesn't sound right. I've just invested in limiting attacks. I've just invested in stopping attacks. Now you're telling me I have to spend money on attacks getting through after I've just spent all my money on stopping the attacks. It makes sense when you say it, but that's not the mentality we can have. And that's proven by that ransomware figure. That exact mentality is being exploited by attackers. People who aren't investing in recovery set themselves up for failure because on the off chance something gets through, because it's a non-zero chance, you risk losing everything. Whereas a small investment into a recovery plan, data loss, backups, makes a world of difference. It's the difference between that hundreds of thousands of dollars rebuilding your environment or a quick backup on a Friday night. And the good thing about the recover category is it's got a lot of utility outside of cybersecurity. Backups are a huge part of everyday life. Files go missing, people delete the wrong thing. There's a lot of value to be gained from recovery that isn't cybersecurity related, whereas limit and prevent typically are cybersecurity focused. So it's a nice value add. Finally, modernize. More so than recovery, this is the step that people love to overlook because we're used to cybersecurity being a destination, whereas now it's a journey. You can't just pay, 10 grand and be happy. It's always about what's next. Things are evolving. And if you're not modernizing your environment, it's not that you're behind in the race. You don't even have a horse in the race. So modernizing is somewhat the most important step, because once you've gotten your tenancy to an acceptable level, and we'll talk about how you know if you're acceptable on the next slide, you can start to think about what's next. What are some things that we should be worried about? What are some things we should be planning for? It's the most fun step because you're no longer treating threats. You're looking to the future and preparing yourself. Just before we leave this slide, this 4-pillar approach is actually one of my favorite exercises to go through. It's a great chance to think about your company. And what I mean by that is if you take any of the attacks we've talked about, or if you see an attack you find interesting in the news or moving forwards, just walk through the 4-pillar approach and think about how your company would treat such an attack. So for example, if we talk about my email compromise scenario earlier. For limit, you could have things like I said of maybe your users can only log in from Australia. So if an attack comes from anywhere outside of the country, you're immune. For prevent, you have things like reactive support, where if someone's account gets logged into from an address that they don't usually log into, that gets detected and alerted. You could have recovery steps such as email backups. So if people try and ransom your files, they'd lock you out of your email. There's got to be some kind of recovery path. And Modernize is obviously looking towards the future, thinking about what's next and how you can plan around it. So I mentioned how to know if you're at a secure state. I'd love to talk about the Essential 8 framework because luckily for us in Australia, our own government has designed a framework to help us know what to do. So for some context, the ACSC is the Australian Cyber Security Centre. That's the body that governs cybersecurity in Australia. And they've designed 37 controls that any business can adapt to secure their business. Of these 37, they've given them different priority levels, different significance levels. And if you're paying attention, you'll probably guess that 8 of them are marked essential. And that's how you get this Essential 8. Within each of these categories, there are a set guideline of maturity levels. So it's a level of complexity for specific controls, things you can apply that will, it's a step-by-step on what will make you more secure and how complex it is. And they have 3 of these levels. So maturity level 1, 2, and 3. And between those, they've made it quite clear what they want out of Australia. For all businesses in Australia, they want you at maturity level 1. If you don't comply with all the controls across all 8 categories for that level, you're counted as maturity level 0, which is fundamentally insecure. But for Commonwealth entities, they actually want you at level 2 or 3. They don't think 1 is acceptable. So it's going to show that they treat themselves to a higher level than businesses in Australia. They just want to see us at that level 1. They have a bare minimum that they want everyone to get to before they're happy. And then they'll look at that 2 and 3 as that modernized step I was talking about. So talking through them, you can see the first 2 about patching, applications and operating systems. These are the things we use and the things we have. Keeping them up to date just keeps us secure. That's a pretty good no-brainer. Multi-factor authentication, that's another huge one. A statistic from Microsoft as well is 99% of identity compromises, so things like your email being breached, are stopped with good multi-factor authentication practices. So if that's not a reason to invest in that category, I don't know what is. Restrict administration privileges is on that limit side of things. It's stopping what's known as administration bloat. So typically people make an admin account, they see it as a God account, they leave it. Why shouldn't I be able to do everything? I'm an admin. That is incredibly vulnerable. If that admin account gets compromised, they can have everything. So this category is all about giving people exactly what they need for the task they're doing, so that if that account gets compromised, you know exactly what it can do. It can't spread across your whole company. It's locked. Application control is further to those tools. For this one, I know that I'd say almost every single new user we have at a company has one application they want to bring in with them. You always get that one request of, my last company had this, I just love this, I use this all the time, it's something I live by. And it drives IT people up the walls because we are trying to control applications. Because put simply, it's that whitelist mentality of if you had no applications, you'd have no application vulnerabilities. We could kill 2 of the categories of the Essential 8. Obviously, you can't run your business like that. So we have to get as close to that as possible. We can't just add things in as we want them. We have to go through a very intentional process of, is this safe? Is this trusted? Is this effective for our business? Bring it in. User application hardening is in that stride. It's then once we have these things, we lock them down to their little box. So at worst, it can do damage in this area. It's controlled. Restricting Microsoft Office macros is one of the oddly specific ones. It's just a long time vulnerability and something they wanted to treat directly. And regular backups sinks that point home. I've been talking about it all webinar, but regular backups are really a lifesaver. It's something the government's asking for, and it's something that we can agree more with. So more on how Atlantic Digital now meets that framework, we have this suite of tools. There's a lot on the screen. You're free to screenshot it, but don't stress. If you want more, we can either put the documents in the chat or we can bring it to our consult with you. There's no rush for you to memorize all of this. What I do want to talk about is These 6 tools and a well-created Microsoft tenancy are what we see as the baseline to a organization's security. This is what we have chosen to effectively address that Essential 8 framework and cover off on that 4-pillar approach. And within these 6 tools is an answer for all of those things. That's actually one of my favorite games. If we have that console, I'd love if you get the Essential 8 framework and try test me on it. You know, for this category, which of these 6 tools treats it and how? But this is something we've done very intentionally. We've tried to, with as much respect towards people's budget, the efficiency of each app, and the effectiveness of it, address that Essential 8 framework, because it's quite obvious. The Australian government themselves are peddling it. We can't turn a blind eye to a standard like that. So it's something we've just backed with its full support. So within these 6 apps is our answer for it all. Finally, a more cultural point is, this is one of my biggest points for the whole webinar. It's all about protecting yourself or paying later. This doesn't have to be protecting yourself financially. If you don't have a budget for cybersecurity, people often just throw in the towel, tuck it to the back of their mind and walk away. But it's not about that. Like I said, a cultural change is really the first thing I want to see. Cybersecurity is so much more than just an antivirus, just a tool that you bolt in. It starts with the people. I don't want to just rely on the people, but if everyone in every business could have an attitude to cybersecurity like someone like I do, we'd see a huge change in Australia. That 10-minute figure from the first slide would go out to like an hour, because people would start to care. When you ask them, don't click on dodgy links, they'd start asking those questions. Okay, is this link dodgy? Is this email bad? When you say, hey, don't install some app you found on the web that has Chinese characters in it, they would start thinking, do I really need this app? Do I know where it came from? Or can I go without it until my IT guy vets it? Cultural change is the first and the best thing and the easiest thing that we can start pushing through our companies. You don't need any finances for it. You can just start talking to your people. Talking more about securing your business, there's one last statistic for it. I had you with a bit of a cross up. 78% of small to medium businesses fear that a major cyber attack could put them out of business. Honestly, when I see that statistic, all I can think is it's probably because the last 22% don't know what's out there. Like we talked about, the average cost for an attack is either 40, 50 or 60 grand, depending on what sector you're in. And that's just the average. Every year, your business goes more digital. You get more apps, you put more of your info online, you trust the system a bit more. If you don't up your cybersecurity in line with that, like I said, you're not behind in the race. You don't even have a horse. I don't know how many of you out there are willing to cop that $60,000 price tag for a breach, but I wouldn't be able to handle that. And the bigger problem is it's not a one-off. Once you've been breached, that's just showing that you've got the critical vulnerability. They're going to keep coming. They're going to keep attacking. You're not going to pay that $60,000 price tag once. You're going to be 5 of those 10-minute calls. So personally, I would much rather just invest in cybersecurity. I'd rather set up the tools, start modernizing and talking to my people. With that, I'd love to thank everyone for their attention. I know that was a lot of talking, but there's that treat image I talked about. That's what you do if you're not looking to the future. But ultimately, we made pretty good time. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat now. I'd love to speak to some. But otherwise, you're welcome to scan the QR code and set up your 1-hour cybersecurity consult featuring myself.